So let's start going over purification for the new Muslim. That means we don't want to go into a lot of details. And like a new Muslim is a Muslim who's not new, but he's very ignorant. And now he's come so that he can start learning. Purification. The accountable Muslim must pray all prayers on time, and thus must immediately learn not only the prayer, but also some of its conditions. Namely, 4 matters of purification, which is, according to a definition, that which permits prayer. Purification, that act which permits prayer. And as you know, those of you whom we've had different lessons together, you know that's a very summarized and brief definition, not a detailed one, because when we're dealing with a new person, we don't want to go into details. We don't want to give him what his mind does not handle easily. To learn some of the things that we've learned previously, brothers and sisters, that requires what? It requires having taken lessons before, and for the person's mind to be accustomed to that Islamic knowledge. So don't go into details with the new person. The first is the full shower, ghusl. It is defined as making water run over the entire body with an intention of worship. There are 5 reasons for being obligated to perform this shower before praying. The first 2 are for men and women: sexual intercourse and ejaculation. And here you don't have to go into the details of what exactly is sexual intercourse and what exactly is ejaculation, what are the signs of ejaculation, etc., etc. When you're teaching this new person, it's enough just to say these words without going into the details that the scholars mention. Why? Because in general, the person understands what you mean by sexual intercourse and by ejaculation. The last 3 are only for women: childbirth and the termination of both menstrual and postpartum bleeding. That termination means the end. So childbirth, if a woman delivers a baby, she needs to take a ghusl. When her menstruation is over, she needs to take a ghusl. When her postpartum bleeding is over, she needs to take a ghusl. Out of those 3 things, maybe the word postpartum bleeding is the only one that needs to be explained. Not only that, but when you're teaching this new Muslim, you probably don't even have to mention the word postpartum bleeding. So you can say to that person, if he's a man, for example, you don't even have to say what all of the things are. For that new man, you say to him, if a person had sexual intercourse or an ejaculation, he needs to take a ghusl. For that new woman, she's brand new, not now sitting and taking lessons consistently. All of this, this information that we're giving this new Muslim, we're supposing we're never going to see him again. So we want to teach him what he needs to know if we never see him again. So if it's a new woman, you might just say to her that if a woman had sexual intercourse or an orgasm, you use the word ejaculation, might not work with a woman very well, or an orgasm or climax, depending on how polite you want to speak and how formal you want to speak. Because remember, when you're talking to a person who's educated, for example, then you need to talk to them like an educated person. If you're talking to a person right from the street, if you're able to, then you talk to them like they understand. But with a certain degree of keeping your respect as a teacher. You don't have to just be like a total, ignorant person from the street when you talk. Just talk to them on their level. So when it comes to a woman, might not want to use the word ejaculation. You might want to say an orgasm, or you might want to say climax, or something to that effect. I don't know if women have other words they might use that they understand from that. So it might be said to a woman that a woman needs to take a ghusl if she had sexual intercourse, or if she had an orgasm or climax, or if she delivered a baby, or if she menstruated. And you might not need to mention postpartum bleeding for that person that maybe we'll never see again. It is performed by making an intention when the water touches the body, and then washing the entire body with mere water. So you're going to explain to this new Muslim that making the intention is by saying in the heart, now I perform obligatory ghusl. Don't forget, when it comes to the ghusl, it has to be, the intention has to be that one is performing an obligation. Note, it is not an obligation that the ghusl be in the form of what is commonly known as a shower, as we already said. It is only a condition that the entire body be washed with flowing water and not wiped with something wet. Wudu. The second is the ablution, wudu, and most people don't know what the word ablution means. You might be better off just using the word wudu only. It is defined as the washing of certain organs with an intention, because as you know, wudu is different from ghusl, and that in wudu you wash certain organs and not all of your body. So the wudu is defined as washing certain organs with an intention of worship. There are 4 things that break the wudu. There are 4 things that break the wudu. 1, anything that exits the private part except for ejaculated fluid of men and women. And that has details. So anything that comes out of the private parts except for the ejaculated fluid of men and women will break the wudu. So you're going to explain to that new Muslim that means urine, feces, gas, and among what you want to mention to this new Muslim is the pre-ejaculation. If he's a man, and the discharge of the woman. In Arabic, it's al-madhi, the madhi of the man and the madhi of the woman. The madhi of the man is the thinner fluid that comes out upon sexual arousal, and the madhi of the woman is the moisture that she experiences upon sexual arousal. In English, they call that for the man pre-ejaculation. In English, for the woman, that's discharge. Especially if a woman is explaining to a woman, it's much easier to make her understand that anything that comes out of the private parts will break the wudu. That includes the urine, the feces, the gas, and it also includes the fluid that comes from the private part upon sexual arousal. And you don't have to go into much more detail than that. So when we teach this new Muslim, we're going to make this person know. And by the way, as the teacher, you're going to have to just mention these things. The chapter of purification may seem embarrassing for either side, the teacher or the student. However, there is no escape from it. And so one must mention these cases. Again, a man with a man or a woman with a woman, such a lesson is easier. But you never know. It might be a man who's teaching a woman or a woman who's teaching a man, and we don't listen to any of those ignorant people who say it's not permissible for a man to teach a woman or for a woman to teach a man. That's absolutely not true, and they have no evidence for that. Even some of them went so far, one time they told a sister that it wasn't permissible for her to make her own father embrace Islam because he's a man. Those were Wahhabi women, by the way, who said that. Because Wahhabi women are exceptionally ignorant. 2, touching the skin of a marriageable woman who reached an age or reached a stage at which she is normally desired. So we're going to make that new Muslim understand what we mean by touching the skin, which means not the teeth or the hair or the nails. Who reached the stage at which she is normally desired. That means the word stage was chosen here to not imply that there's a special age at which a woman becomes desirable. So once she reaches a stage at which she is desirable, touching her skin will break the wudu of both of them, the toucher and the touched. And keep in mind that reaching a stage of desirability is not equivalent to puberty. Puberty and desirability are not the same. They are not synonyms. 3, touching the penis, anus, or vagina of the human with the inner part of the bare hand. Now, when you're teaching this new Muslim, you want to keep your expressions as easy as possible, but at the same time, there's a certain amount or a certain way you need to talk with this person without going outside of the expressions of the scholars. So the way it's mentioned here, you pretty much want to say it to that person. You want to say to that person anything that exits the private parts except for the ejaculated fluid of men and women. Of men and women is only there for clarification. And the word ejaculated fluid is there instead of semen, because the word semen doesn't work for women in English language, at least nothing modern. Touching the penis, anus, or vagina of a human with the inner part of the bare hand. And you don't necessarily have to focus on the word human. Okay? Now, if the one you're talking to is clever, he might say, "Why did you say human?" Then you'll answer him. Otherwise, you don't have to go into it, because most likely, most likely, especially if you're talking to city folk and not farm people, most likely that person will not be touching the private part of an animal anyway. So, it's enough to say the word, to say the rule as it is, and you don't have to explain every detail. Touching the penis or anus, or vagina of a human with the inner part of the bare hand. And then you're going to display, what does the inner part mean? Putting your two palms together and pressing lightly with your fingers spread apart. Explaining to that person that the inner part is what disappears when you do that. So the tips of the fingers and the sides of the fingers are not included in the inner part. And bare hand means without a barrier. And 4, losing consciousness except if one slept with his buttocks firmly planted. And losing consciousness means going crazy, fainting, and sleeping. Except if a person slept with his buttocks firmly planted, yes, mention this detail to that new person. Unless you're like in such a rush and it's like you're on the street somewhere and the both of you are walking and talking at the same time, which means that probably a lot of details are going to flee his mind quickly. You don't have time to think. You don't have then maybe you can skip the issue of sitting with the buttocks firmly planted. So, in other words, keep your environment and your situation in mind also when you're teaching this new Muslim. Because if you're actually, for example, sitting in a masjid or sitting in your house, then it's much easier just to be relaxed and talk. But if you're on the bus and your stop is coming up soon, or for example, you're traveling, let's say you're on a bus, maybe your ride is a little bit longer, or you're walking, you met him on the street and the both of you are walking, then you need to know how to summarize when to summarize. But in general, you can mention to that new Muslim the case of sleeping with his buttocks firmly planted in case he makes wudu and then he falls asleep sitting up. That's not far-fetched to happen. He should know that he doesn't have to make a new wudu again and he can just pray. One performs wudu by doing 6 things. 1, making the proper intention when the water touches the face. 2, washing the face, and explain to him the face is from the normal hairline to the chin and from the ear to the ear. Washing the hands, forearms, and elbows, meaning from the tip of the middle finger to the elbow. Wiping the hair, even if it's one hair within the boundary of the head. Washing the feet with the ankles and keeping the order. You're going to explain how to make wudu with this person, and then what are you going to do? You're going to make wudu with him. You're going to go down to the musalla, go down to the wudu place, or if you're in your house, you're going to go into the bathroom, or at least get a cup or something and make wudu so he can see it. Either you make wudu with him, or you make wudu and let him see you. Him or her, of course. And what you should do is make wudu with that person. You make wudu and you tell him to do like me. First teach him, like what we said. Then you say, okay, come on, let's go make wudu. Then you go and you teach him. So you say, all right, first we're going to wash our face with the intention, and then you wash your face. And then you watch him wash his face. Likely, he's going to miss the area in front of his ears. He's going to miss the side, like between his ear and his sideburn. So make sure he gets everything. Washing the hands and forearms up to the elbow. Make sure he goes past his elbows. Wiping the hair. And washing the feet up to the ankles. Make sure he washes his feet well. That's an awkward one for people, especially if you have this new person putting his feet in the sink. He might feel a little strange. Okay? A lot of times the wudu station has like a seat so you can sit down and make wudu. I personally like to stand up and make wudu because when I sit down it makes my pants all wet. So I just like to stand up and make wudu. But you might like to sit down yourself, and you may want to let this person sit down and make wudu. Tayyib. Now, very, very important, teaching the person about istinja, cleaning after urination and defecation. And by the way, when you teach that person how to make wudu and how to make a ghusl, explain to that person that these are the obligatory parts and that there are still parts that are not obligatory that are good to do. It's a good idea to explain that to the person so that he won't leave you and then pick up a book that says that all of this and that is obligatory, and then he says, oh, that person didn't teach me properly. Let him know that there are obligatory parts and there are parts that are not obligatory, and tell him. And many books do not tell you the difference between them. So don't be surprised if you pick up a book that teaches you how to make wudu and it tells you to do 10 or 11 or 12 or 13 things, and I'm only telling you 6 things. It's because I'm telling you what you must do, and everything else that I'm not telling you is an optional part that's better to do, but you could leave it out. And if it were me, I would say to that person, I'm teaching you just the obligatory parts because you're new and you need to get the obligation down. The third matter is istinja. So the first was ghusl, the second was wudu. The third matter is istinja, which is the obligatory cleaning after anything wet comes from the private parts except ejaculated fluid. Again, I'm using the word ejaculated fluid to avoid the word semen. For all wet material that exits those organs is filthy except for the ejaculated fluid. It is pure. And I don't think there's any harm with mentioning that to the new Muslim. Telling that new Muslim all of the wet material that comes out of the private parts is filthy. Except for the ejaculation fluid, it's not filthy. And even though he hasn't heard a formal definition of filth from us yet, he will have a general understanding of what you mean. And you don't have to go further. It can be performed in 2 ways. The first is by water. It is recommended to pour the water with the right hand and to wipe with the left hand until there is no trace of filth left. The second is by wiping 3 times with something dry, pure, dry, uprooting, and unrespectable. And make him know what's unrespectable. That means religious papers and human food. Each wipe must be with a different side of whatever is used for wiping. And you don't have to go into the details. You can use, you don't have to go into many details, but tell them you can use a stone even. I usually tell a new Muslim, you can even use a stone. Sometimes they're surprised and sometimes they're not. I usually say you can even use a stone for istinja, and stones work very well. And when you start teaching this new Muslim, especially if you see that he's giving you his time, he or she is giving you the time, and really they want to learn properly and they're coming back, then make that person know. The first time, make that person know that, tell them, now we have a lot to learn. You need to be patient and be ready to take a lot of knowledge. It's time for you to learn. So that he doesn't think that you're just going to be done in 10 minutes and let him go. But if you do find that this person wants to be done in 10 minutes and he doesn't really want to hang around with you, then just teach him the belief. Keep him as long as you can and keep teaching him as long as you don't fear annoying him and discouraging him from coming back to you. Because remember, as people of da'wah, people who spread Islam and teach others, we do want them to come back to us. And that's not a matter of us looking at ourselves with any high regard. It's just a matter of fact. It means that we're saying, I've learned the correct knowledge, and I wish the best for this person. And I'm afraid for him to go out and I'll never see him again, and maybe he'll meet a Wahhabi, or maybe he'll just meet some ignorant people who think you can read books. So yes, you do want him to come back to you. Doesn't mean that you think of yourself as someone who's a big shot. Even if you're a sinner, you want him to come back to you as long as you're teaching the right knowledge.